let's listen to this short jingle and then over to us. Okay, so sorry for starting a bit late, but older people have a habit of making long speeches. So we have to live with that. But we will be shorter. We will be more crisp in order to keep your attention focused on a major topic, which at least we believe is a major topic, which is this issue of climate overshoot. As you may know, the Paris Peace Forum, who is a co-organizer of this spring session in Bulgaria this time, created in 2022 a global commission, the mandate of which was to review the climate overshoot issue, whether or not we will overshoot the 1.5 degree, which was the Paris Agreement, collective determination not to do. And if that was to be the case, which unfortunately looks likely, review the various solutions, options to cope with this situation. One of this commission had several original pictures. One was that I composed it with a majority of members from the South, because my view from the very beginning, and I think the experience shows this view is right, is that a conversation about climate overshoot is not the same if you discuss it between northern experienced experts, politicians, and people coming from the South. And another of the specific feature of this commission is that we associated to our work a group of young people. They were not members of the commission proper. They did not have to subscribe to the conclusions of the commission, the report we published last year in September during the UNGA. So they were not formally members. They were not asked to agree on the recommendations, but we work with them and they work with us with a sort of ecosystem. And I can say that they influenced the work, the discussions, and the conclusions of the Commission, not least because the full members of the Commission often referred to what these young people had to say in the various interactions we had with them. So it's this dimension of what does this mean for the generation to come, the one that will have to cope with climate overshoot, whether we overshoot it and then go back to a more normal situation, whether we overshoot it and remain with a higher than 1.5 degree constant, or whether after having overshot it, we keep increasing the heat on this planet. So we are looking forward, and in order to look forward, we believe it's important to listen to, again, those who will be the actors, the main actors in the future. So in order to do that, we've gathered this panel this morning with, as you can see, 4 young people plus an old monkey. The old monkey will do the moderation, and the young people will be speaking. They are all climate activists, or entrepreneurs, or advocates. It's a question of a degree. We have Sharmai, Louise, Anita, and Roberto. Sharmai comes from Hong Kong, and she's been a member of this youth group. Louise comes from the Philippines, and she's been a member of this youth group. Anita comes from Kenya. She was not a member of the group, but she could have been a member of the group, and de facto may become a sort of de facto member of the group, and same for Roberto, who comes from Mexico. What I think matters in the way the young generation is considering this issue is that their attitudes, the view of what to do, their shapes, forms, patterns of engagement differ from my generation. And this is where I would start the first round of questions. My first round of questions, and we will take them from my right to my left, is about your view of what the impact of overshooting climate change will be. What, in your view, is the main point of attention? Why does it matter? And where do you see the main problems from where you are and for your generation? That's the first question. And then we will have a second round, and I will take it from there. On, according to you, what are your order of priorities among solutions? The solutions which are on the table have been deeply investigated in many shapes, including in the report of the Climate Overshoot Commission: cutting emissions, adaptation, carbon capture and or storage, and exploring geoengineering solutions. So, in your own take, from where you are, what, in your view, is the right thing to do? So, let's start with the impact. Charlie.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sharmai, and for me, the answer of the impacts of should climate overshoot be happening? Well, it is already happening. For me, the answer is pretty simple. So I recently went back home after quite a long while, and to this day, like, my 2 sisters still do not understand the kind of work that I do, and they don't even really know how to articulate climate change, climate adaptation, or even climate overshoot in general. So for me, the biggest issue for our generation would be that we are experiencing the effects of climate change, but we don't have the language and we don't have the knowledge to articulate what we're experiencing. And we're right now not empowered with the tools, with the knowledge, with the finances to come up with solutions to do what we need. And so for me, then the solution is also the access of climate finance for youth. So actually, I work in the field of climate finance now, and there is a report by the Children's CERI that came out last year that said that 2.4% of climate finance right now are dedicated to children. But even in the sense that 2.4% is still an overrepresentation of how much money our generation actually get, because first of all, this 2.4% is only for children responsive interventions. They're not necessarily climate finance dedicated for youth empowerment. And also second, when we're talking about children, we're not necessarily talking about people like me, right? I'm not a child per se, But then people oftentimes use these terms interchangeably, like children, youth, young people. And depending on which conference I speak on or like which project I'm on, I'm considered an adult, I'm considered young people. So this is also an issue that there's not an agreed definition between multilateral organizations on what is really the definition of youth, what is children, and are these funds actually earmarked for youth or for children? So I think there is a lot that needs to be done also with multilateral development banks, multilateral climate funds, on youth-led responses for climate overshoot, climate adaptation, and also earmarked finances, earmarked climate finance dedicated for youth initiatives.
Thanks. Louise, what's your take?
Well, my take is actually very close to home as well. So for context, I work in the Philippines with farmers to help them build agroforests. And this is on the front line of climate change. I live in a region where we say we're the welcoming committee of typhoons. Any degree of warming in the Pacific Ocean, we experience typhoons at the end of the year. So Southeast Asia has been experiencing record-breaking heat waves. We know that this is a harbinger or precursor to huge weather impacts. And because I work with farmers, our work is dependent on stable weather, on a good temperature and climate. So the impacts of climate change would go directly to our form of income. Some people would not be able to put food on the table, put their children through school, and it would be just a struggle to live through the next 6 months after a typhoon just because people are constantly surviving. And in the context of young people, that means that many young people are disadvantaged, are vulnerable, have just less advantages or privileges or entitlements just because of the fact that they're constantly in a state of survival instead of a state of just being able to live or get an education. I always say I'm here to talk about climate change, but there could be a girl who's so much more brilliant than me out there in the provinces, but just because her parents can't provide for her, or she's in a region where she's constantly vulnerable or in a state of surviving, then she's not here. And who are those young people and how do we include them? But to your second question, Pascal, I think in terms of what is more important in climate solutions? Oh, we'll come to that, okay.
Thanks. We have the second round on the priority of the solutions. So what's your take?
Thank you very much. I think for me, speaking from a community perspective, coming from one of the communities that is most affected by climate change, a community of pastoralists, I can say looking at climate change, it has affected us socially, economically, and forced migration, which is leading to conflicts, the gender issues where children, especially girls, are affected more with the water scarcity, then their hygiene is affected, and so their schoolwork is also affected. Looking at food production, even in my country, and with the extreme weathers where we experience droughts on the extreme, and then when it rains, we experience floods on the extreme. Without the balance, then it becomes really a challenge. And the biggest problem is when we do not see the most affected included in the crucial spaces when it comes to climate. So where we talk about them, talk for them, but then don't really have them so that we can talk with them. So I think that's, yeah.
Thanks a lot. Roberto?
Yeah, thank you so much to be here and hearing us. So thank you, Pascal, for the question. I think it seems like almost, not here on this table, but also on the international field, that we are fighting as climate activists for who's the most vulnerable country, or who's the country that's, being suffering more for climate, the climate effects or loss and damage, etc. And I think it's really interesting because it leads us to different questions addressing the climate overshoot, which, it's understood that how do we face and how do we seek for solutions when we overpass 1.5 and we see the climate, climate emergency too. But in Mexico, we've been working in, not only Mexico, but mostly in Latin America, we've been working on the climate emergency, which is a completely different concept based more on legislation and how we prepare the legislation and constitution, the countries to respond and economic response. So they recognize and works aligned with the international finance, and we can get those funds to work and, be resilient specifically. So Yeah, based on the question, I think it depends, and I will really love to talk a little bit more about that multilateralism that you shared, that beautiful concept that was also mentioned at the inauguration. We are already seeing the effects of the climate emergency, but the countries are not doing the same at the very same level, and I think that's pretty obvious, and that also affects not only the activism that we do as the generation, how we can manage, to get the results or to seek for opportunities for the next generation, but also the upcoming years. We are just 7 years ahead of 2030, so I mean, that's really alarming, talking about global north, global south, and how to close the gap. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there.
Good. So overall, although in different situations and with a rather large spectrum of impacts, your view, unsurprisingly, is that it matters more for your generation than for others. And you've, I think, shown example of why. Now, let's move to what has to be done. You're all engaged in activism, in promoting not only the fact that we have a big problem, but that we need to find solutions. So, in your present situation and engagement, what is, in your view, the priority? The Climate Overshoot Commission has proposed an agenda which we summed up with CARE, C-A-R-E, cut emissions, promote adaptation, remove carbon from the atmosphere, and explore geoengineering solutions. What is your order of priority? If you are talking to the people you want to convince that the game needs to be ramped up, what's your main point, Charlie?
So in my line of work, I think it's really important for us to begin with, well, at least what I work with directly is adaptation, working with farmers so that they're best positioned for sustainable success, making sure that their livelihoods have sustainability as a baseline, and that we're working to build what is a green economy. But everything that you've mentioned has been incredibly important to work with in parallel. It's not just one thing or the other, but that's just my priority, at least in the Philippines, so that everyone at the grassroots is prepared for a climate crisis. Of course, cutting emissions. We cannot continue to pollute the planet if we are going to try to save it or restore what we have and what little we have left in that small gap of time. And of course, I think carbon capture is incredibly important and salient. In the field of agriculture, the mission is to put more carbon back into the soil. We don't look at the immediate possibilities of transitioning agricultural livelihoods and their possibility for capturing carbon from the atmosphere. It has an immense impact. But it's very hard to measure and very hard to do. But the transition is there, the solutions exist, it's just tapping into them and making them possible and training farmers on the ground to do that, which ties back into adaptation.
Okay, so your ranking is adapt, cut, capture. You did not mention geoengineering.
Well, I do believe in geoengineering. I just think that it is a kind of, it's a very sci-fi scenario of what we will experience when we have, and we're very much on track for even like a 2.7
so
overshoot.
it comes forth.
Yes.
Good. Charlie.
So in terms of for the CARE agenda, I think it's really important, like I said previously, that a lot of people still don't know how to articulate the effects of climate change. And so I think youth empowerment and also just technical training and also mentorship available for youth to really understand these critical issues, or even like we're talking about solar geoengineering, and I bet there's also people in this room that don't even know what solar geoengineering means. And so I think these conversations really need to start now, not even just soon, but now, and to empower and educate our generation.
Yeah, that themes comes very often. You need to know more. You need to understand more. So, in your situation, what's your ranking?
For me, adaptation will also come first, and the reason being that we are already facing the effects, and now we need to support the victims of climate change to be able to adapt to these changes that are already happening. So that's why that one comes first for me. And carbon capture comes next, because then we have to reduce what we've already emitted, and then we can also now focus on the reduction of the emissions.
And if you put carbon capture second, carbon capture is just the various possibilities of removing what we have put in the atmosphere. And there are basically two big families of solutions: nature-based solutions, like farming practices, like using better mangroves or sort of stagnant water system that absorb carbon, or working on the ocean, which is a big carbon absorber. And then you have a family of sort of more industrial solutions, which is these big machines which cost $1 billion and that aspire the carbon which is in the atmosphere and stock it. What trust do you have in nature-based solutions?
I have trust in nature-based solutions because, looking at how local communities have been doing, and the approach they've been using is nature-based solutions, just that we have not really acknowledged some of these solutions as nature-based solutions. But if you look at what happens at the grassroots, mostly it's nature-based solutions. Yeah.
Roberto, what's your take on these various options?
Thank you. I was waiting for this question. I think after a soft and a deep thought, the priority is peace. Last week I was in a conference in Mexico City, and there were amazing, tremendously activists from Latin America, from the Global South. And there was this final reflection that said, we cannot get to 1.5, we cannot get and talk about decarbonization first if we don't talk about we as a community, as a human, and as really, connected to each other. And second of all, we cannot talk about compromises, multilateralism, polylateralism, collaboration, if we couldn't just stop the war. As simple as that. So my priority is peace. Every day I work with indigenous community in Tabasco, in Chiapas, in Mexico. Every day I also work with deputies, governors, senators on legislation, youth NGOs, and business, just as Coca-Cola and Nestlé. And I think they all agree that we need peace, not only to coordinate the supply chain globally, to nature-based solutions, to reforestate, to have trees. And it's so complicated because conflict is also, if you go to history and a little bit of literature, the conflict is nature for humans. It's always there, conflict. But the conflict that we're facing right now is only a war conflict, but it's a conflict with nature. It's a conflict with biodiversity. It's a conflict with our oceans. We just passed the Oceans Days 2 days ago, and we're not talking enough about the oceans and plastics, and we love to talk about decarbonization, but that conflict, and in the context of the Paris Peace Forum, I think we need to raise more awareness and to compromise. And it's so complicated for youth, not only because we are the most vulnerable ones, we are finding the opportunities, education, jobs, but we're also fighting for human rights, for basic education. We're fighting to have that recognition. Also on June, on the LGBTQ Community Month, we keep fighting for basic human rights and recognition. So it's so hard in the deconstruction that our societies and the world is having right now. Those put a lot of challenges on the table, and how we're gonna face it, I think it's only through peace. Peace is the key to solve all our problems, but we need to talk more about that. Then we can start talking about transition and how to make sure that there's literally no one left behind and talk about the SDGs. I think the Sustainable Development Goals, it's really clear on the 17 goals, all the topics there. And yeah, trees. I think that's the best technology that we have right now, and we don't recognize it enough. Trees and reforestation. Yeah.
Good. At some stage, I will check whether there are questions in the assistance. I hope there's a mic somewhere that could circulate. Is there? Okay. I just want to make sure that this logistical detail can be solved before we open the floor to the audience. In the meantime, I have another question for, on the one side, the two members of the Climate Overshoot Commission youth group, and on the other side, to my left. On my right, the question to Shirley and Louise is, what did you learn with your experience of 2 years with the Climate Overshoot Commission? From where you started at the time, what have you learned? Louise, and then Shirley. And the question for both of you will be, look back 5 years before now. Remember what your take on this issue of climate overshoot was. What has changed in your experience? What have you learned for the last 5 years on how to cope with that? Shirley and Louise.
Thank you, Commissioner Lamy. Thinking back, we began somewhere around the end of 2022, and the world situation for climate was already very different from how it is now. Just back then, we saw, in the past year, we saw that every single month on record has been the hottest month in historical record. Take any month, April, it's been the hottest April in history. And so when we first began this, we were thinking of the possibility of a future climate overshoot. And now we're starting to see that climate overshoot happening. In the past year, it's been 1.45, and that's as a global average. Some regions, like Southeast Asia, are seeing 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees overshoot than their usual averages. And so when we first began this, it was such a hard concept to wrap yourself around, like overshoot, geoengineering, how does this work, what policies are in place, and how ill-prepared countries are to face an overshoot situation. And it sounds like an apocalypse movie. It sounds like something in our wildest dreams, and now we're seeing it now. And in that span of time, it came from my position where I work in activism, working in grassroots and that kind of micro level learning and feedback, to this higher level global situation of things. And you see just how crazy it's gotten. And so I think in the past year, it's realizing that we need so much more ambition, so much more political willpower to get things done. We need a lot more policies in place in different countries around the world that are curated to their regions to face climate overshoot. As you could see from this lineup, we're all from different parts of the world, and we're all experiencing similar and different issues. We're seeing parallels, but still no proper framework that is either global, regional, or specific that addresses what we will do for people, for planet, for our lands, for our industries in the event of an overshoot. And we're on track for 2.7, I believe. And in the recent COP discussions, we have great ambition and drive. We've already addressed fossil fuels in the very first place, and we're starting to talk about finance. But this is just incremental change if we want to actually see a restored planet well below 1.5, because 1.5 is a bad situation. We want to keep it well below that, and we're on track for beyond it.
Okay, Sharmai.
So I know, Commissioner Lamy, you introduced all of us as like climate activists and climate advocate, but I really would not recognize myself as such, because I think a lot of climate activists, they're very like front-facing. They go to a lot of speaking engagements, but in reality, actually, the Climate Overshoot Commission is actually my first public multilateral engagement of sorts. So it's actually my first opportunity, being in these multilateral spaces, and I'm always reflecting and very cognizant of the spaces that I occupy and the positions that I belong, and also like, what am I doing here? Am I representing my people enough? And so one thing that I feel very fortunate is that the commission decided to take a chance on me and to select me as part of the commission, because the rest of the youth engagement group, they all come from very astonishing backgrounds. They've always been in the activism space for quite some time now, and I'm just somebody who just graduated from university, did a lot of grassroots community level engagement, and all of a sudden I'm pushed to this very unfamiliar space. And one thing that as I reflect and I realize is that it's always the same people occupying the same multilateral spaces. And if it's always the same people occupying these spaces, speaking year in year at the same events, saying the same things, then there's something really wrong with our system. And sometimes I also don't feel comfortable occupying these spaces because even though I'm from Hong Kong, I'm actually based in Berlin now. I've been away from my city for quite some time now. So I'm not the best person to be in the position to speak about Hong Kong or to speak about my region, the effects that my community is facing. And so something that I've been reflecting a lot recently and that I've learned is to really try and see if there are spaces for even more youth empowerment. And I'm honestly very grateful that my university nominated me in the first place to ultimately join this commission. But I'm also constantly trying to reflect on whether there are even more spaces for people at my university to engage in these multilateral spaces. And I hope that people will recognize that my ability to be in like these panels and be in these conferences today is not a testament to youth empowerment, but that more so that I am an anomaly because I was privileged enough as a first-generation low-income student to be able to go to an elite university and then to also then be nominated by my university. These are all luck and privilege. And there are also people from my background that don't have these luck and these privileges, and we need to continue empowering these people. And I think it's sometimes a bit unfortunate when there is an event about youth leading responses, and then most of the people that attend these events are youth. So I feel like sometimes I'm preaching to an audience that is not there, because a lot of these things that I want to talk about are decided by the older generation. So when I'm talking about climate finance needing to be funneled to youth, I mean, it's great that you're all sitting here and you will continue to advocate for in your own spaces for youth empowerment, but at the same time, I think it's also important for the older generation to hear about this. And so I hope for the adults here sitting here, that I hope that maybe after hearing all of us speak, that you would have something to take away and also to talk with your colleagues. And yeah.
Good. That's a strong contribution. Now, can you both, Anita and Roberto, can you both share with your colleagues, and I see many of these colleagues here, can you share with them what you've learned working on this issue for, let's say, the last years?
Looking back, I can say to about 6 years ago, I didn't know much about what climate change was. I was just fresh from high school. And I remember being introduced to Sustainable Development Goals for the very first time. And over time, I just knew that environment conservation and climate change issues were just tree planting. And so I started just planting trees with my friends in campus. But thanks to events like these and workshops where I got to attend, listen from people and understand that so whatever we're experiencing is exactly what climate change is, because then climate change was sounded like something so far away from us, but then understanding that the effects that we see, the things that we experience in our day-to-day lives are actually impacts of climate change, enable me to become a better advocate of these issues, and using my digital platforms where I'm now a sustainability influencer talking about these issues to people on my platforms was just made easy by the fact that I had to learn over time. And from just planting trees to running an organization that focuses on climate education both in Kenya and Tanzania, to organizing activities for children that educate rural children and youth on what climate change looks like. And in 2022, I ran for office for position of Member of Parliament in Kenya's general election, where I was the youngest candidate for that position. I did it in a Green Party. And we all know that Green parties are not really popular parties in Africa, but we did it anyway because we just needed to inspire one another and other young people that we have to also stand on what we believe in, even when it's not the most common thing. And so looking at the journey throughout years, it's been learning and trying out everything where if I see something as a problem, I ask myself, how can I contribute and be part of the solution? I don't have to know everything. I don't have to be an environmentalist by profession, but I am one by passion. So how can I also use that to educate members of the community? And one of my greatest projects that I'm currently working on is that we currently support a school. We work with a school, so we use education to transform rural communities, and that's in the Maasai community. And it's so interesting to see myself become a teacher and teaching other people and teaching other children what I was not even taught, what I had to learn by myself. So I think it's been an interesting journey, and opportunities like these given to us by Paris Peace Forum are the opportunities that give us platform to talk about our work, to represent the people that we work with back at home, and hoping that we can be able to bring them to such spaces so that they are also able to learn just the way we do. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Roberto, and then I'll see whether there are questions for you.
Thank you so much. Just what Charmaine and Anita were sharing, time goes so fast. Just 6 months ago, I also ran for the Senate in Mexico City. I was the youngest candidate, not only for Mexico, but in whole Latin America. And thinking on your question, if I wouldn't known, I'm not selected. They took me out of the campaign. Of course, they don't want a climate activist. But if I wouldn't known that they will do that 5 years ago, I would have done such a, to raise more awareness between youth and telling them, and this was supposed to be my last quote, but I think that the main focus that we need to realize is that just being passive and waiting for someone else, and this is your job, waiting for someone else to ask the questions, to do their activism or do the job for us, it's lacking us as the world, as a global community behind. That's why we are not on track of our global commitment, because we are waiting for someone else to do it. We are waiting for someone else to ask the right questions. So when the question is open, I want to see all hands raised, please, because we really need to move. We really need to act, and this is not just words. We really need to commit with our cause and say, what are we really willing to do? Because it's not an easy thing. It does have a deconstruction, as Shireen was saying, and I love that because it's not only about being born and raised in a certain part of the world, but also deconstructing yourself in this global citizenship or global identity that is happening right now, which is a unique opportunity to do climate activism in these new relationships. So yeah, I'm gonna close that there. If I wouldn't know right now, like 5 years ago, with a vision, that was before the pandemic. That was before the Ukraine and Russia. That was before Gaza. So I asked myself, I'm thinking, but I think this question is for you. Would it be worth it if 5 years ago, or 1 year before the pandemic, if we had made a huge campaign about the pangolin, have we stopped the COVID? Would you think the COVID-19 would have stopped if we had a huge campaign about the pangolin and biodiversity, etc.? I think we're having already those big campaigns about climate emergency, climate overshoot, climate change, human rights, and that's what I told you. You really need to move. If not, I think it's pretty clear what's going to happen. Science is really clear. The IPCC is really clear. I saw STEM, happening here, like a lot of, you have access to education, either it's for privilege or not, you have the access to all that information. Again, it's deconstructed because it's really hard to take that information and say, oh, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it with all the social charge that lays on us. But definitely, before the pandemic and before the conflict, would it be worth it if we advocate for peace? That's the question. It's still being worth it if we advocate for peace. It's still being worth it if we advocate for climate change, because that's something we ask every year in COP, that we ask every 6 months in the Paris Peace Forum. You know, it's still really hard because we are not seeing a lot of results. Yes, we win the small battles in certain points, but if we don't mobilize, if we don't unite, if we don't do this networking, acknowledge and know each other, it's not working. It's not fast enough, and it's not on track according to the compromises that we have. And again, science is really, really clear that after we pass 1.5, which I think we already have, but we are not facing the effect of the climate emergency globally, we will be having another response, and probably it will not be really nice, because I want to leave it there. I don't want to say.
Okay.
Bad prognostic.
Thanks, Roberto. Any questions you would have for your colleagues? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's great. Okay, so we still have roughly 10 minutes, given that we started pretty late. So what I suggest is that all the questions are raised, and you will note them, if that's okay with you, and then I will give the floor to the panel for the answers, but it's good to have many questions. Go ahead.
So, hello first. Hello everyone, my name is Fouad El Bouari. I'm a MSXP student at the Faculty of Governance, Economics and Social Sciences. My questions to all of the panelists here is regarding institution evolution. Political institutions, either in national or international scale. Some of you might have talked about it a few minutes ago. My question is how incompatible these current institutions are to the modern world, and how they need to evolve to tackle certain issues like these fair transitions, and also to enter to more specific sector. If there's a necessity for a more planified way of organizing our societies, if the current traditional liberal way of doing isn't failing us in a way, because we're counting a lot on the private sector, on the evolution of all of society, and it is necessary, but isn't a more centrified way of organizing our productions also something that will be seen more and more to the future? We have seen it make its proofs in China, for example, with the decrease of prices, etc. So thank you.
Good, thanks. Next.
Good day. Thank you very much for being here. It's really exciting to hear you. So thank you very much. If I have to synthesize, I hear youth empowerment, advocacy, and mobilizing. What we haven't really touched upon is social media, and potentially the capacity for social media to do all of that. But also probably, and that's where I would like to hear your talk about it, is that maybe social media is isolating more and more youth. And I know, for instance, in the United States, about a third of young men under 30 years old would say that they are completely lonely and detached from society. So my question to you is, in the current situation, are you satisfied with how we use and you use social media? And if not, what would you do to get a better impact through social media?
Okay, thanks. Yep, this side.
So thank you, first of all, for bringing this conversation and putting emphasis on the youth. I have two concerns. on a macro level and on a micro level. Firstly, on a macro level, when we're talking about climate overshoot and trying to not fall ahead of the 2.5 degrees Celsius barrier, we all know that the biggest challenge is the phasing out of fossil fuels. However, we all see that we are in need of a revised multilateral model. Also talking a lot about North-South cooperation and everything. And there are some initiatives like the Inflation Reduction Act by United States, but we still see that there is this divide between the West, who are already developed, and the South, who are still seeking development, but it would be unfair to limit them by saying that you still have to also phase out fossil fuels. So my first question is, how do you solve that? How do you revise this multilateral model so that we still have development without fossil fuels, and how do we still incentivize this revised model? Also, on a micro level, the way I see it is climate change is also mainly a behavioral problem, in the sense that it has to do a lot with mentality, because we also always put the blame on the other person. Why do I have to do this when the other person doesn't do that? So how we, especially the youth, because we are the ones who are more vulnerable, the other generations, they don't necessarily have to care, since they know that by the time their life ends, they wouldn't bear the consequences. So yeah, how do we make sure that we generalize the mentality, especially on the young generations, so that we all care and that we all make change? Thank you.
Good. Other questions? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, let's have first women question. We've had 3 men, so let's diversify a bit.
Thank you so much for presenting this interesting commission. It's my first time hearing about it. I'm actually Hasna Jagar. I'm a learning design manager at UM6P, but also I'm the North Africa representative of the Africa Youth Board on Disaster Risk Reduction at the African Union Commission. So my question would be more oriented to the disaster risk reduction and also to the African context. So as young leaders who will inherit the consequences of the climate overshoot, and recognizing that the African population will be, by 2050, half of it will be youth under 25 years old. So how can we ensure that the climate overshoot is the climate overshoot strategies are prioritizing effective disaster risk reduction measures that are tailored to specific needs of the African context, and also to the vulnerabilities of young Africans? And what specific actions and platforms can we use to ensure that their voices are heard? Someone mentioned social media, so maybe we can use that. This is just my suggestion, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. So my question is, should wealthy nations bear a greater responsibility for addressing climate overshoot, considering their historical impact? And also, maybe as my colleague he said, is it fair to impose strict environmental regulation on developing countries that are still seeking economical growth? And the last question is, do we actually believe that geoengineering is a valuable solution concerning its maybe too many risks and uncertainties?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay. I still have 2 questions there.
Hello. Thank you so much for everybody for speaking today. It was really helpful and really insightful. I'm Isabel. I represent Young European Leadership. And my question is about us as an organisation, we make space for Europeans to go to kind of big conferences and big events and make space for European youth. But my question is to you guys, I would really want to hear your thoughts on how we make spaces for youth, especially from the Global South, and how we continue to support youth and give them the spaces to really work towards kind of fighting the climate crisis.
Thanks a lot. And there's a final one down there. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Pascal, esteemed speaker and distinguished guest. I am Zachary Chris, an entrepreneur. I have a tech solution that is promoting to reduce physical clothes. So we're promoting to make digital clothes, and it's the first in Africa. I believe this solution is existing worldwide. So this is how I present myself, but my concern is the following. I believe in today's context, the biggest problem, as Shang mentioned, is knowledge and capacity building. So education is the key for most people. And today I'm part of CYMG, is the Children and Youth Major to UN Environment Program. So in the group we have people from the 4 continents, and the overall is 478 members. And I believe this number is super low if we want to raise awareness and build capacity. So I want to hear from you, what are the recommendations to leverage and raise awareness and build capacity in youth today? I gave this example of CYMG as a reference. If you have any other recommendation, so people can know more about SDGs, the climate overshoot, and details like this. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'll now give the floor for short answers from the members of the panel. You don't have to address all the questions. Please take the ones you believe where you can give a sharp, crisp, short answer, roughly 2 minutes each. So, start with you, Shamai.
Yeah, sure. So I think I will
2
be
minutes.
more equipped to answer the micro level questions. And so in terms of like capacity building and to making space for youth in the global south, I really think that we as youth should not be continually categorized as just victims of climate change, but actually as agents of change. And like I said, a lot of the climate finance right now for youth is earmarked as like child responsive interventions. And so I think there needs to be a mindset shift, first of all, on that. But also, second of all, I think there is a serious problem with outreach when it comes to these initiatives, because it continues to be that elite youth continues to be entering these elite spaces. And even for people like me, who I come from like a first-generation low-income background, who now have the privilege to access all these opportunities, there's actually a term for people like me, which is called the privileged poor. So in a sense, like even though I come from like a not so fortunate background, I am still having all these access, all these privileges that allow me to have the lingo, to have the knowledge to be able to navigate these elite spaces. Whereas I feel like a lot of actual youth that are coming from my background do not necessarily already have all these tools and knowledge in place. So I think in terms of outreach, I think there should be outreach not just to actually go on the ground, to reach out to grassroots initiatives, to reach out to local communities so that you can actually empower the people who will be most affected by it. Thanks.
Good. Louise, 2 minutes.
Excellent. Well, there's a lot of questions. I will try to comprehensively cover as many as I can. But there was a piece on institutions and also a little bit on, changing the status quo of what our systems are. And I think one of the things that I've always been advocating is that we think of development as this or that, when it can be a lot of different things all at once. And we think of development as maybe more cities, more buildings. But I'd like to think that maybe development can be something else entirely. What if it means more agroforests? What if it means every city has green spaces? What if it means safer spaces for all of us on your piece on peace? And I think that it's incredibly, narrow-minded to think of development as just technology. Maybe the solution for the future isn't to reach forward and think of the new big techno fix, but it could also be to reach back and combine indigenous ancestral wisdom with ideas for the future and maybe find the science behind them, why they make sense for my region, and how they can be better communicated for our generation. Because our generation, on the social media piece, we are intermediaries for technology for the previous generations. It would be a waste to throw away wisdom of our elders, but it would also be a waste not to utilize our power to use social media, to use technology, and create solutions that are tailor-fit and embody the wisdom of centuries before us. Because at one point we were doing things right. At one point we weren't on a scale towards existential devolution. But beyond that, it's also closing the funding gap. Social media isn't where it needs to be, but it's our role to change that. So behavioral change for good and creating a set example, which youth need to do, and maybe communicate better to our elders. It's not just these closed rooms, but engaging in spaces where we don't normally have a seat at the table and really forcing them to hear our needs and also do that in a safe environment that isn't confrontational.
Good. Anita.
I think on social media is that we need to tap on social media, because you look at our generation is on social media. So then how do we also use digital access to pass meaningful information? I don't know about your country, but for example, in my country, the biggest challenge we have is that those people who have most people who have huge platforms on social media will not prioritize such conversations. And so, and also they don't realize that they guide the discussions that people have. So they, maybe showbiz, you'll talk about something and they'll tell you that showbiz sells, so we are not interested in telling your climate stuff and all that. And that's why I shared before that I took the personal responsibility to use my digital platforms to tell more about climate issues in simple terms that people do understand. On the issue of making spaces for youth, I think it has to start with meaningful youth engagement, where we don't just engage the youth to tick a box that the youth were present and that's it. No, it has to be meaningful. And for us to be able to ask for our spaces as young people, we have to start as the young people who have these maybe small spaces here and there. What are we doing in our own capacity to create room for other youths who don't have this access? Then when we are many collectively, we can ask for our spaces as we continue to climb up. Lastly, on the issue of facing developing countries, phasing out fossil fuels, I think I can proudly say that Kenya's electric grid is 94% renewable. And for me, it becomes a problem when we focus on asking Kenya to phase out its fossil fuels when Africa as a continent itself contributes to less than 4% of the global emission. So for me, just and fair transition is for countries like ours to be the last to phase out, and the countries that contribute more to start phasing out. So fast phase in, fast phase out. That is my own opinion. Yeah, thank you.
Good. That's very clear. Roberto, and then
Finish. Yeah,
conclusion.
okay. Really quick. I love it. I love all the questions. Thank you for all the questions. A part of the work that I do is with UNIRIS and the University of Oxford, and my research line specifically for a culture and social reset, as I said, on constitution and how we're going to face that regulation and how it's changing, human rights perspective and how we measure human rights based on the climate emergency, the effects of desertification, all the climate effects. So it's really interesting. What I mentioned is because I think to have the bigger picture is to realize that first the education question, I love it. There's a beautiful conference that I recommend you all to watch. It's a UNESCO conference that it's on YouTube. It happened 4 months ago. It's available on YouTube. But there's other researchers from Harvard and MIT and Tsinghua University. And they're talking about the paradigm that is now with artificial intelligence. And there's one main question on the conference is, there's the need to still learning after AI? And the question is, and the researchers, maybe you think it's advanced or not, but it's no. We don't need to skip learning because we have access to all this information, etc. No, so it's like the question, do we need to keep buying encyclopedias after the internet? Did people keep buying encyclopedias? They didn't. So it's almost on the same page. To talk on social media, I love it. I'm an ambassador for TikTok in Latin America. There's a program of social media creators. They try to coordinate the biggest creators to talk about climate emergency. It didn't work the first generation, so now they're on the third generation. But the main topic on social media, and this is again a question for you, is that misinformation and I forgot the other word. Misinformation and, United Nations Secretary General says is the biggest challenge for climate action, but you see it extreme right, disinformation and misinformation on social media. So they're more coordinated than we are, so we need to actually take the social media platforms too. And yeah, there's so many questions maybe outside. Thank you.
Good. So I will conclude with one answer to one of the questions, one short observation and one short suggestion. The answer to one of the questions on this north-south issue, the Climate Overshoot Commission, my colleagues and myself, if you look at the report, our clear recommendation on this is we have to phase out from fossil fuels, but in a differentiated way. Given the asymmetry in responsibilities and impact between the North and the South, the North has to exit first and leave some time for the South to do it. That's, in our view, the fair solution, although it's more easily said than done, and we are now working on a sort of user's notice on how this should be done. The observation is that the conclusion of this panel, I think, is that if you are looking for solutions to climate change, the main solution is passion. That's what you all have in common. That's what you have deployed, and that's what you have to be thankful. And my suggestion would be that within UM6P, some of you take the initiative of creating a climate overshoot club. That would have 4 patrons. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sure they'll be ready to help you, including online. And then we could organize another conversation of this kind, not just between the 4 of you, but between 30, 40, 50 of you. That would be the way forward. Thanks very much for your attendance, and thanks to our panelists.